Alright, let's start coding. Well, let's not start coding, but let's start building our system. If you remember from earlier when we created our users resource, we had 7 routes that were created for us. We're not going to create all 7 of those right now, but let's start with this first one here, this index action, which lists all of the users in our system. In order to do that, we could jump into coding right away, but let's write our tests first, since this is test-driven development. This time we need to make a directory in our spec directory called features, because that's where Capybara expects those tests to be. From now on, we won't have to make that directory since it'll already be there. So let's create a new file, and let's call it user pages spec.rb. And the first thing we need to do is include our spec helper, which just sets up all the right things for Rails and our spec so that these will work properly. And the rest of this is just going to be our tests. So the first thing we can do is these are going to be tests that test our pages concerning our users. And specifically, our first set of tests is going to do showing users. But if you remember, this index action and this show action both do showing. This index shows everyone as opposed to the show showing a particular user. So let's go one level deeper. And I know it's getting deep, but hey, we've got code to help us. Some developers will actually use two space indentation rather than the 4 space indentation I'm showing you here, just because it's pretty common to go deeply nested in our spec tests. So what are we going to do for our tests then? Well, the first thing we need to do is go to that web page. And so before we actually do any testing, what we're going to do is we're going to visit that web page. And what's the web page? Well, let's look at this URI pattern right here. We know it's going to be /users. And that's the Capybara command to do that. After we visit that web page, then we can have tests that look something like this. And maybe now you're thinking, it. What is it? You'll remember earlier we had to have this subject right here that told our spec what it referred to. And then if you think to the Capybara, this visit populates an object called page that stores the page contents in it. So what we want to say is when we say it should, we're saying the page should. What should the page do? Well, it should have some sort of content. Maybe it should say this is a list of users. And maybe it should have the count of the number of users. Well, how do we know how many users there are? Well, in Rails, we've got a testing database separate from our development database, and so we have very tight control over what is in the database. In fact, it's empty to begin with. We need to populate it with users. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go 25 times. And so if we're going to do it 25 times, we know we're going to have 25 users. And to create that, we're going to do user.create. If you think of earlier episodes, I did user.new, and the reason why I'm changing this to create is when you do user.new, it only creates that user in memory. It doesn't store it in the database. User.create calls a combination of new and save in one combination, and that's what we want because we want to save it to the database. So we're going to give a name, and we're going to give it an email, and we're going to give it a password. Now you might be thinking to yourself, hey, didn't we set up some validations that require this name and email to be unique? And you would be right. So we need a way not to give every user the same name and email, but we have to personalize it. And the easiest way for us to do that is by taking advantage of the fact that the times method gives us a little parameter here telling us what step in the iteration we are. So let's give this person a different name. Let's say person I. And let's give them an email that is person.I@example.com. So now we've got unique names and emails for each of our users because we take advantage of this parameter here. And now we've got a listing of the users, and we've got 25 users, but we shouldn't be too happy with this testing yet. I mean, any static page that doesn't change could pass this test. We need to make sure that all those users appear. So let's add one more test here. It should show all users. And so now we are going to want to go through all the users. How can we do that? Well, there's a method on the user model called all, and that returns basically an array of all the elements in the database that match that model. And so we can iterate through that. And now we can do something like it should have, and I'm going to be a little bit more specific here. I'm going to say have selector. I know you haven't seen that before. If you're wanting to know more about Capybara, go look at that web page that I pointed to earlier, and you'll find all kinds of cool Capybara things. And now we can say that. And let's add one more here because we probably want to see not just their name, but we'd like to maybe see their email. And I'm doing this in separate tests because I don't want to combine name and email and say the name has to go before the email or vice versa. They don't matter to me as far as the test is concerned. I just want to see them both there. And now I'm much happier with these sets of tests. So let's save these and run our tests. So bundle exec our spec. And so now it's going to crunch and read all our tests, the tests from before, as well as these new tests that we created. It's going to run them, and we see 3 failures, which corresponds to 1, 2, 3 it statements that we just added. So good, they're failing. But if we look a little bit more closely, we see that it's kind of failing for a weird reason. It's saying failure visit users. That doesn't have anything to do with this that's up at this visit here. And it's true here because notice that this before happens before each one of these tests happens. We redo that. And so the visit is failing because it doesn't know about this index action for our user controller. Basically, Rails is saying, okay, /users requires an index method in users controller, and it doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and edit our users controller and help it out a little bit here. So let's create a method index, and what that's Rails knows that the name of the method to call in this controller is the name of the action that we were creating. So if we do that and we run our test again, we still want to see these 3 tests fail, but we don't want them to fail because the visit /users didn't work. We want to correctly visit /users and then not find the content. So again, we see our 3 tests failing here, but now it's still failing on visit users, but for a different reason. And that different reason is that we need a corresponding view for this action, because Rails says, okay, here's the controller, get data and pass it to the view, and it can't find the view for the controller to pass it to. So let's create our controller real quick, and that's going to be an app views, and it's going to be users because that's the model we're working with. And the name of our view is going to be the name of our action, so that's index. And then I'm going to add 2 suffixes, .html because we're going to be creating HTML with our output, and .erb because we're going to take advantage of some embedded Ruby in here. So let's go ahead and put in here you are on the users index page. Okay, so now we've got that view, and we can go ahead and run our test one more time. And so now it's going to churn. We still want these three to fail, and they are failing, but now we should be a little bit happier. It's failing because it's expected to find the text, and it didn't find that text. It's expecting to find this text, and it didn't find it. It's expecting to find a list item with this text, and it can't find it. So we have now properly created tests that we can now implement our page with.